Most of all the work that Congress does, it does in what are called committees. Committees are just ways of breaking up groups of people into smaller groups of people so they can deal with some of the issues and problems facing Congress. So for our purposes, there are three different types of committees, and they all do different types of things. The first type of committee is called a select committee. A select committee is an ad hoc committee, meaning that it's temporary. Select committees deal with specific problems or issues that are facing the United States. So some examples are the failure of the federal government during Hurricane Katrina, the failure of the government to detect the attacks of 9/11. So whenever there's a big sort of national tragedy like Hurricane Katrina or like 9/11. Also, there is select committees dealing with the Benghazi attacks that took place in Libya. Whenever there's a big issue facing the country, Congress forms these select committees, and they are formed to deal with these specific issues. So select committees can be groups of people that are formed in just the House. That would be called a House Select Committee. They can be dealing with specific issues by the Senate. That would be called a Senate Select Committee. Or they can be comprised of both senators and House members. Those are called Joint Select Committees because they're made up of both House members and senators jointly or together. So once a select committee deals with that issue, usually through things like holding hearings and doing research, and this goes on for several months. When they're done, what they do is they put together a report, and that report is presented to the rest of Congress, and it's usually published for any Americans to get access to. They're usually online as well. So you can get access to these reports. The whole idea behind putting together a report is for Congress to use this when making future decisions in trying to prevent another tragedy from taking place. So the Select Committee's report on Hurricane Katrina, for example, is used or supposed to be used by Congress to look at the failings or the failures of the federal government during that situation as a way to try to prevent that type of failure from happening again. So those are called select committees. Standing committees are committees that have ongoing authority. In other words, they are not ad hoc. Standing committees are also not joint committees. Both the House and the Senate have their own standing committees. So standing committees are where Congress breaks up all of these important issues that they deal with, and they look at these specific issues in specific committees. So there's like a Senate Armed Services Committee that deals with all of the different aspects of the military, of the Navy, of the Army, how much members of the military get paid, things like nuclear weapons, the types of weapons systems that Congress thinks that the military should purchase. All of these different aspects of the armed services are dealt with in the Senate Armed Services Committee. The Senate Judiciary Committee looks at nominees that are made by the president to become federal judges. So the House and the Senate both has their own standing committees. Again, standing committees have ongoing authority. They're not ad hoc, and they're not joint committees. Finally, there are what are called conference committees. Conference committees are very special and specific types of committees. They are always ad hoc. In other words, they only deal with one thing at a time, and then they're done. And there are always joint committees, meaning that they're always comprised of members of the House and the Senate. And this is what conference committees do. When legislation is created, both the House of Representatives and the Senate will have different versions of the same legislation. By the time the process takes place in the House and the process takes place in the Senate, each body will have a version of the bill that is completely different, because there'll be different things added to the House version and different things added to the Senate version, and at the end of the day, you're going to wind up with two very different pieces of legislation: the House's version of a bill and the Senate's version of the bill. Conference committees are put together specifically to unify those two versions of the bill. So to take the House version and the Senate version and make some agreements. Okay, we'll keep this part of the House's bill, we'll keep this part of the Senate's bill, and so on and so forth. So all the differences between those two bills will be ironed out at the end of the day. And then that one single bill that's been unified will then be presented to the president, who can either sign it into law, or the president can veto it. Therefore, it doesn't become law. But the Congress, together, both the House and the Senate, will always present the president with a single bill, not the House version and the Senate version. So those two versions, again, are unified in what's called a conference committee.